Welcome to Old Path Ministries and our study through the Gospel of John. We are in chapter 11 today, and we're going to get to what is a very familiar story in the text. It's the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead. And so this is, again, one of those passages, even if you're kind of new to studying the Bible, you've probably heard it mentioned of even the name Lazarus is something that has made its way into our discussions, and the idea of resurrection from the dead. It's pretty familiar. So this is certainly one of those chapters where we get an introduction, if you will, to more of the family dynamic between Mary and Martha and Lazarus. So there is already a familiarity, clearly, between Mary and Martha and Lazarus. You get that very early on in the text. There's an episode that's mentioned in verse 2 where Mary has already been one of those people, we're assuming from some of the things that we find in the other Gospels, where she would have been one of those accounts of the women who had come in and wept, and her tears had washed the feet of Jesus, and she wiped away the tears with her hair and cleaned his feet. There are a couple of accounts of that. She may very well be one of those. Who knows? She could even be one that we don't have an account of, other than what John is saying here. So with all of that said, we don't need to read too much into that whole thing, but it helps us in our understanding of who this person was. And the proximity to Jerusalem is what's really kind of interesting. Let's remember, by background's sake, he was there in what would have probably been December, and that was chapter 10. And he leaves and goes back to the area where John was baptizing. We're going to find out that after this episode that he's also going to withdraw himself from that area and go a little bit further to the north. But all of that is going to all the moving around is only going to take a matter of months, because it'll be back in the springtime for the Passover, which is what we get at chapter 12. So really it's the stories are condensed down into just a few months of interval. We don't know what happened, what he was doing. From John's account, what was going on in the time after he left Jerusalem and went down towards the Jordan, or what he would do in that time when he went up into Ephraim. So with all of that said, chapter 11 is where we are. Let's have a word of prayer and we'll look at the text. Father, we thank you for the time that we can spend in your word, and we would ask that you would guide us and lead us by your Holy Spirit and give us understanding as we study your word. Open our eyes to the truth that is here. And we pray, Father, that we would make proper application in our understanding of your word, and that we would walk accordingly. We give you thanks. We give you all praise in Jesus' name. All right, so chapter 11 says, "Now there was a certain man sick, Lazarus of Bethany, a town of Mary and Martha." And so the three people are mentioned here: Mary and Martha, their brother Lazarus. They're familiar. Even the names of these people are familiar to us. We know this is the Mary and Martha that were sitting at Jesus, or it was Mary who was sitting at Jesus' feet in Luke chapter 10. Starts at verse 38. And Lazarus isn't mentioned in that one. It's really the Mary and Martha thing about doing the needful thing. Mary was the one sitting, taking in all the things that Jesus had to say, while Martha was just busy about things. And we know that whole story. So this is that family. And there's a familiarity that goes on with them. So they've known one another for some time as far as the gospel accounts are concerned. We have little information other than that, but there's a familiarity clearly. So we get this at verse 2. "It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil, wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick." Now, the question is, do we have the actual recording historically of when that took place? We're going to see that Mary is going to be in chapter 12, one who comes back, and she will anoint him yet again. But as John will tell us, it was for his burial. So there's something that has happened before this event. There's already that familiarity, because when Luke records in chapter 10 of his gospel, once again, you got to try to figure out where is it relative to that last time that he comes into Jerusalem at the time of Passover. And so, there's no sense in trying to figure out exactly if we have the recording of her coming in, if she's one of those people that we do have record of. of coming in and wiping her or wiping his feet with her tears and her hair. It doesn't really matter. We know that there are a couple of those occasions, and if she's one of those people, unnamed, or if it was even another time that we don't have record of other than what John talks about here, it doesn't change anything. So verse 3 says, "Now therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, the one whom you love is sick." Now, interesting, there's going to be a play on words here. When you see in verse 3 the word love, when we think that Jesus loves someone, we instantly think of that love that we hear spoken of. God so loved the world. In the Greek, the word for love, agape. If you are doing it as an action, and you're saying it like in Greek, it's agapao. So it's the action of the noun. So if Jesus loves that person, then that's the word that's used. Here, what's used, it says, now again, this is their looking at him. This is said to him this way. And so let me read it. Therefore, the sisters, it's the sisters who sent for him, and they said, Lord, they sent message to where Jesus was, speaking to Jesus, Lord, the one that you love, like as a brother. The word that's used here is phileo. It's not agape, phileo. So it's that one that you have this brotherly fondness for this Lazarus, my brother, and he's sick. So then look at what's said next. So it says, when Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. So when he says this, it's not that he doesn't understand the magnitude of it. He's dead. He's going to die. Jesus will say that, basically, that at the time that he hears it, he's sick, it's going to be something that's to death. So how could he say it's not unto death? Well, because he's going to resurrect him, and this particular illness will not keep him in the grave. It will not keep him dead, though he will die. Now, we're going to find out that there's a delay in this because it's going to give more impact to the actual miracle, and no one would be able to explain it away. So with all of that said, in verse 4, notice this is John giving commentary looking backwards at it. And so he's going to say something different. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Now this is not phileo, this is agapao. He loved those people. He had a love for them that was not just brotherly, but it was a love that was self-sacrificial. No matter what it was requiring, Jesus would pay the price to satisfy the demands of the intensity of his love. In this case, he would go to the cross for them, as he would for all of humanity. But he loved them in that perfect sense. So with that being said, again, remember that's John's commentary as opposed to their saying to Jesus, the one that you love like a brother, he's sick. John looks back and says, Jesus, the kind of love that he had for them was perfect and sacrificial. So that I just love how those words can mean so much different depending on how they're used. So in verse 6, so when he had heard that he was sick, he stayed for 2 more days in the place where he was. So when they went to call for him, more than likely down by the Jordan, then by the time that they got to him, Jesus delays another 2 days so that there would be no question as to what has taken place. But it would also put them in the place of recognizing that it's beyond hope for them to have Jesus just heal the sick. But it would also be a lesser magnitude miracle, and he's going to do this. Now again, Mary and Martha and Lazarus are all believers. They know him, they believe in him. This is obviously done for everyone who didn't believe at the time, and it is also put there for all those who would read of this story for the next 2,000 years, bringing it to our time. So with that being said, verse 7, then Jesus said to the disciples, let us go into Judea again. So the disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews have sought to stone you, and you are going there again? And so that they're just incredulous. Every time that you go there, they're trying to kill you, but you want to go back there again? Now, he's not saying going back to Jerusalem, but this is close enough in proximity. It's only a couple of miles away, just to the east. It's over the top of the Mount of Olives, and bang, you're just about there in Bethany. It's that close. So, with that being said, The disciple said to him, Rabbi, again, verse 8, they're trying to stone you. Were you going to go there again? And then verse 9 said, Jesus says, are there not 12 hours in the day? And if anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. So, yeah, of course, they're saying the timing's not right for this. Jesus says the timing is absolutely right, spiritually speaking. They're concerned about the temporal day-to-day of things. Jesus is saying, my time here is short. And so he's using, in the metaphor sense, there are times when you should be walking and times when you shouldn't. If you're going to walk at dark and all that, you could fall into all kinds of trouble by not being able to see where you're going. But he's using it in the spiritual sense of application. It's now is always the time for him because the light of the world is there for all to see. And so it's that idea of bringing illumination. It goes back to what we see chapter 8 and being the light of the world. And he uses that as metaphor quite often. So with that being said, in verse 11, these things he said, and then after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him. So still playing, as we read it in English, still not completely explaining what has taken place. And so he opens it up. Now notice again, this is John. It's always important for us to remember this. When we go from the place of just straight narrative, of giving us the history, then it's John just giving us history. There are those times when he mixes in commentary of being an eyewitness, one who was there to witness the things firsthand, and we get the flavor of that. Now, what he's just said here, he's quoting Jesus as this is what Jesus said. Of course, he's an eyewitness. Now he's going to add some commentary. So let's read again what he says in verse 11. These things he said, and then after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him. Now, he says this because it's going to open dialogue to the disciples. Remember, what's happening with Lazarus and Mary and Martha and all those in Bethany is happening over there. But Jesus is dealing with his disciples here and now at the same time. So there are so many different moving parts that are going on that it's easy for us to just jump through the narrative and not realize that the ministry was going to take place when he gets to Bethany, but the ministry begins with the disciples here at this place. Because he says, he sleeps, and I'm going to go wake him. So, of course, that would immediately trigger, again, remember, they've already given the objection. Every time that you go there, they try to kill you. Now, if he's just sick, if he's just sleeping, he's going to wake up. So why go and put yourself in that peril? Look at what happens. John gives us this commentary. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest in sleep. And so John is saying, this is what we all heard with our ears. This is what we thought he meant. And yet we realized that it was something entirely different. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest in sleep. And so verse 14, then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, period. Now remember, he's delayed himself, and he's doing that because the glory of God is going to be revealed. He's already said that. He delayed, and this has given time for that sickness to turn into physical death, and it's all done deliberately. It's by plan. It's by design. Jesus knows it. They don't. He's been speaking to them in terms that they could misunderstand. Now he's going to make it where there is no misunderstanding. So again, this is the matter of accountability. Let's do one other thing, and I know I mentioned it a lot, but John's gospel is different in this way. John is writing so much farther after the fact than the other gospels are concerned. So when John is writing these things, he's had 60 years roughly of hindsight to look back at the events. And so not only do we get his eyewitness account, but the implied thing here, and we should really catch this, he is recognizing this work of Jesus, and he's had plenty of time to work this through in his mind. He's as convinced as he's ever been, clearly because he hasn't changed his mind. He's saying all of these things, and John presents Jesus in a way that none of the other Gospels do. and that it focuses so heavily on the deity, the person of Jesus as God in the flesh. So one of the better ways to illustrate that is to show just how much power he had over life and death, but also how much he understands of things that would be beyond human understanding. God was revealing things. The Father would reveal to the Son the things that were taking place. We have to remember that Jesus left aside some things about his place in taking on a body of flesh and blood. Still God in the flesh, but there were things that you could see that clearly Jesus would defer to the Father, and things that at the same time he'd have things revealed to him that there shouldn't be any way that he would know them. This is one of those. Look, Lazarus is dead. I've delayed myself because I'm going to go do something that is miraculous and that no one else could do. So he knows an awful lot of things, and yet he's doing things in such a way it's to the benefit of the people seeing. It's done for the benefit of those that would come to faith or those who already believed, to have it completely solidified. So that's all of what's taking place. And we are very, very close to the end of his life and then his death and resurrection. So all those are moving pieces, and John's helping us with our understanding of it. Now, as he says this, Lazarus is dead, period. 14, verse 15. And I am glad for your sakes. There again, it's for their benefit. Jesus could have just, remember, he's done this already. He has remotely, without even going to the person, he has healed. Remember the centurion that came to him at Nazareth and said, or had messengers come, but it was this daughter that was sick and down in Capernaum, and Jesus said the child is well. And so actually it was a centurion that came, and then he met his servants on the way and come to find out that the daughter was made well at the moment that Jesus and he were having that discussion, and Jesus had said that your daughter's well. With all of that being said, remember, he's able to do that just because. From a distance, nothing's going on. It's just a matter of his will to make that person well. In this case, here he's saying, I'm not going to make him well from a distance. I'm going to let it be obvious to everyone that he is in fact dead. And so for me to come and resurrect him will make it just one of those you can't explain away. It's not just that he was sick. No. They've gone through the whole burial procedure, and the guy's in a tomb for days. So the idea that it's going to be resurrection is clearly the reason why. So once again, Jesus said, I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. So Jesus is going to do that not only for the people who are there, because some are going to come to believe in him, but this is a disciples thing. Now, this would be a good thing to have seared into their memory because it's so close to his death and his resurrection. The idea that he could resurrect the dead and they saw it should have given reason for them to believe that even if he's put to death, he would resurrect as well. And he's already said as much, and he will say yet again to them on their way back to Jerusalem for that last time that he is going to be betrayed and then put to death, but resurrected on the third day. With all that said, Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Now, there's a lot that people speculate about this. First part of the speculation, this sounds like something Peter would have said, but it's not Peter who says it. And Thomas, seen as somewhat of a lesser, is the one who mentions this. And there's, again, the second part of the question is, was Peter not with them? Some speculate. John doesn't say so, so let's just leave it at this. It's Thomas who says this. There's two ways you can look at this. Let us go die with them it could mean one of a couple of things. It could mean it's that fatalistic, it's great, let's go die as well, because, if Lazarus is dead and Jesus is probably going to be put to death because the Jews are there and they're all worried about this, then I guess we'll just go and die with him, go die with Jesus. or others that would say, looking at Thomas, that this is more one of defiance and of grit and of fortitude and of let's go and do this. And if he goes, we go. However people want to look at it, either way, it's Thomas who says, well, for whatever it's worth, we'll go with. Now, verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, he already knows that. It's just reported to him it's 4 days. Of course, he knows this. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, only about 2 miles away. Okay, so just directly to the east, over the Mount of Olives, you come to Bethany. And many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Now, verse 20, then Martha, as soon as she heard Jesus was coming, went out to meet him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now, this is an interesting thing, because this really does become a question of what we believe and how fervently do we believe it, because you're going to see, I guess, almost instantaneously, a bit of a backtracking from Martha, because as far as she was concerned, if Jesus had been there when he was only sick, everything would be fine. But now that he's dead, it's beyond the grasp. It's beyond what can be done. So she goes to meet Jesus. Some people speculate that it was kind of, let me give him a piece of my mind. He should have been here already. No sense to read that much into it, but you could see that there's real despair in her. She realizes that it didn't have to go like this, but she doesn't know what's about to take place clearly. So, verse 21, now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, some see it as an indictment. Others, it's just like a if only, not being angry or anything, but just thinking the what if. If only you had been here, we wouldn't be in this place of mourning. He wouldn't be dead. He wouldn't be in the tomb. It wouldn't be 4 days after the event. All of that stuff could have been avoided as she sees it. So she says this, which is amazing. But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give it to you. Now, that even now clearly means, even though he's dead, I know that whatever you ask, there's still that possibility. So healing him of sickness would have been easy. He's dead, but even now I know that you can do this. Now, the idea of resurrecting the dead, she has to have heard that this has already taken place and that Jesus has done this already. But for whatever reason, she immediately kind of contradicts herself. You'll see here in just a moment if you're not familiar with it. Even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Verse 23, and Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Flat out statement, just period. Her mind pivots immediately to the idea of resurrection. Now, that clearly shows that she believes that all people, even though that they die, they will see life again after death. And it's more of an eternal thing. At the last day is what she says, because notice what it says. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So she knows this. Now, whether she's heard it directly from him, whether it is that people have elaborated that because of him that the dead would live again, that was Old Testament. We knew that would be the case. The Old Testament talked about a resurrection of the dead. Didn't keep the Sadducees from being a sect within Judaism that denied the resurrection. She clearly believed in it. So with that being said, she goes, just run through the dialogue real quick. I wish you'd have been here. Me paraphrasing. I wish you'd have been here, because if you were, then Lazarus wouldn't have died. And Jesus says, he'll walk again. He'll rise again. And he's going to rise from the dead. Yeah, I know, Martha says. Yeah, I know, but even though you could do something about it, his resurrection won't come until the end. Okay, well, here's one of the I am statements, the fifth in the series, in the line of the I am statements. Chapter 6, he's the bread of life. I am the bread of life. Chapter 8, I am the light of the world. And in chapter 10, it goes from being I am the door to the sheepfold and I am the good shepherd. That's 1 through 4. Here in 5, the fifth one, right here at verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life, goes on and says, he who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live, and whoever lives and believes in me shall not or shall never die. Now, how many times have we been at funerals and memorials where we hear that mentioned? So, first of all, this idea of resurrection, that very simply is that which was dead will come back to life. So, resurrection. It is something that is believed fervently by both Jew and Gentile, or Jew and Christian, I should say. It's believed by them, whether it's Old Testament, the Jews believed it, and anyone who is a believer today, Jew or Gentile, they believe that to be true because Jesus resurrected from the dead himself, proving yet again that he had the power over life and death. In Jesus' resurrection, it was also a conquering of death because he had died in the first place. It was the conquering of sin because his blood was shed, and that would forgive sins, but his resurrection shows that he had power over life and death, and that he could resurrect us and bring us back to life from the dead. You get the picture, the importance of this? If he failed in either of those two things, if he never gave himself as a ransom and died, he never would have resurrected, and then every promise he ever made would have been null and void. So all of these things had to take place in order to secure for us forgiveness and eternity and resurrection from the dead. Without it, there's no hope for the believer. Let's just be honest about that. So if it's not a physical resurrection, there's nothing. If he didn't die on a cross and shed his blood, there is no remission of sin. There's no atoning work. So we can't even disagree on this stuff. If people disagree on those very simple facts, they're not believers, and it is not us who would look at them and say, brothers, sisters. They're totally outside of what is belief. So, Jesus says, when it comes to the matter of resurrection, when he says, I am, that means he is the personification of the idea. So when it comes to resurrection, the thought, Jesus then becomes that literal, he is that very thing. He is the resurrection. That means without him, there is no such thing. So he is the resurrection. I am the resurrection and the life. So the resurrection that brings about life. And so because of that, and this is simply put, because of that, the person who believes in me, though he may die, he will live. So there is life after death, but belief is the issue. Belief in who? Jesus, the one who is the personification of life resurrected. Now, so whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Once again, we've heard this at memorials and funerals probably more times than we could count. And usually that's exactly where they stop that quote. I remember sitting in a memorial once. It was for my aunt. I was not the officiating person. I was just in the audience, and I did know that there would be a time when we got to the point of eulogy that I was asked to do something and say something, so I did. And the guy who was doing the memorial basically read everything out of a book. He didn't know the person that well, didn't know my aunt that well, and it was just one of those type of thing, the typical clergy with the collar and everything else, and he's just reading out of a book. It's just, you go through, this is what you're supposed to do at a memorial. So he reads this part, and he does it with all the tonal inflection. I am the resurrection and the life, and though, all that stuff. He doesn't say the next part, and I did. So when I got up, I had said, it's an important thing that we remember what has just been spoken here, and Jesus saying that he is the resurrection and the life. And I took the time to exposit it very much like I'm doing here, but pointed out that we hear that quoted very often, but we always, I shouldn't say always, but most always, they leave out this part. Jesus speaking to Martha, do you believe this? It's one thing for Jesus to say these things, and it is an entirely different thing to say, now that he has said it, do you, the person, do you believe these things to be true? Because he's made an absolute statement. I am the resurrection and life. A person can die, but they will live. Belief is the issue. And then so personally to Martha, do you believe this, Martha? And that's why it's so important. You can talk to people all the time. Who was Jesus? He's the person that died for the sin of the world and resurrected. Okay, they may be able to say that. Whether they believe it or not is an entirely different matter. That's why it's always good for us to say, okay, great, you know how to recite that, but do you personally believe it? because that's the difference between eternity separated from God and eternity with him. That's the difference between heaven and the lake of fire. Pretty heavy stuff. So she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe." And here's what she says. First of all, she calls him Lord. That's the recognition of his authority. That's the recognition of his sovereignty. And she says this. Here's the things that I believe. She mentions three things. You're the Christ. You are the Messiah. You're the one who is the Savior of Israel. Remember, though they had believed in him, Jesus is very much a Jewish man. There weren't a bunch of Christians coming around and all the rest of that. This is before his death and resurrection. This is still very much Jewish in its understanding. So she looks at him, she says, "I believe that you are the Messiah, the one who is promised. I believe also that you are the singular, you are the Son of God." And this would be a recognition of his deity and that he is unique and different from all others. And the third part, and that you have come into the world. So you, at this point in time, you are that person that God has anointed and designated for this time, for this purpose, and here you are among us. So you are the sovereign, you're the Son of God, and you're here among us. That's a recognition, and it's real eye-opening because not all believe this. So when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, "The teacher has come and is calling for you." So this is a part that we get from John's narration, and Jesus never told Martha, "Go get your sister Mary," but that's exactly what she does. So again, it helps us in our understanding that we get the highlights of everything, but we get other things by implication. So verse 29, as soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and she came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha had met him. So as Martha leaves, Jesus remains where he is, away from where everyone else was. Martha goes to get Mary. Mary comes back to him where he was standing. And then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, saying, she is going to weep. She's going to the tomb to weep there. So they don't know what's going on. They just see her get up kind of hastily and goes. They're speculating. She must be going to the tomb. Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he groaned in his spirit and was troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, "Lord, come and see." Now, what's going on here? And there's about to, again, be something that John is going to give, looking back in hindsight of this. So Jesus sees the condition of the people. He sees what's going on with them, and you can see that there is an emotional response that he has, which just, I think it's so important for us to remember this, because we focus on him and the magnitude of who and what he is and what he was doing at this time. He's the creator of the universe walking among his creation. We think of him in that kind of such lofty terms. And yet you're going to see there's a very personal, very human day-to-day aspect of him, but his eyes are open to things that they could only imagine. So it's balancing that he's the eternal God walking among his creation to he's this compassionate creator who loves his creation, and it pains him to see the condition of things. Let's look at that. It's amazing. Again, verse 34, when Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he groaned in his spirit, and he was troubled, and he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And so Jesus wept. Now, why would he weep? Certainly not for Lazarus. It's not for himself. It's for what? The only thing, when you start to say, who is he not weeping for? It leaves you with only a few options and then the reason why. So he's clearly not weeping for himself, not concerned about that. He's not weeping for Lazarus, because Lazarus is about to be resurrected from the dead and he knows it. It's only for those people who are there. And so why then would he be weeping for those people? It's for the very personal aspect of it. Their heartache, their hurt, their all of that. And why is there heartache and hurt and all of that to begin with? This was never the intention. God never created everything just so that it could fall into disrepair and that death would enter in. That was not the normal course of things. Go back to the garden, Adam and Eve, there was no death there. Death happened because of sin, and because of sin, death entered in. That's what we know from either Paul's writing or just from reading through Genesis. So here Jesus sees the fallout of sin and the collateral damage that comes from it, and now death and suffering and all of that stuff comes in. And here Jesus just sees his creation that he loves. God so loved the world that he sent his son. So the Father and the Son both look at their creation, and it breaks their heart to see the condition of things. And this is what causes Jesus to weep. I love the fact that he, with everything that he is, and all the grandeur that is, and the majesty of it at the same time, is so human in that aspect that he emotes this way, that it causes even he to grieve and to weep. We should never lose sight of those two sides of him. Very, very important. So Jesus wept, and then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Once again, going back to what they had said in verse 3. So that he loved Lazarus, that brotherly kind of love. The idea that they were not being critical at this point probably means that these were just people of Jewish background around, maybe friends of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, not like the Pharisees always looking to argue kind of the Jews. So some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? Now, by that idea of opening the eyes of the blind, that probably is looking back to what happened just recently, chapter 9. And all of the commotion that had caused, that Jesus did this, were spitting on the ground, mud in this man's eye, washed at the pool of Siloam. The Jews being really angry with him because he did so on the Sabbath, and their hypocrisy. That's all fresh in their mind. The most recent of the big miracles that he had done that they had seen. Hey, isn't this the same one who opened the eyes of the blind? So, couldn't he have kept this man from dying? Couldn't he have done something when he was just sick? Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb, and it was a cave, and the stone lay against it. Now that groaning is probably because if they only had known or paid attention to all of what he's done, the idea of resurrecting the dead still is no big deal. So Jesus said, take away the stone. Now this is how we know clearly that this is a problem. First of all, if a guy's sick, you don't stick him in a tomb. So you just leave him in the house until he gets better or until he passes. Well, he's clearly passed. They're beyond that. He was sick. He's now dead. He's in the tomb, and he's been in there for days, 4 of them in particular. And so, look at this. The sister of him who was dead said to the Lord, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead for 4 days. Clearly pretty unpleasant. Jesus said to her, didn't I say to you that if you would believe, that you would see the glory of God? So he's holding her accountable. Do you believe this? Okay. So with that, it is a matter of accountability. Didn't I say that this would be the case? That I would bring him back. He would raise again. So with that being said, let me make sure that we remember this. As he raises him from the dead, it's one thing for a person who may have just died to be brought back from the dead. Our doctors can do this. A person can be literally clinically dead. Their heart stops beating. There's no way that they're going to get better on their own. They can take heroic measures. They can shock the heart. They can do all those kind of things, and they can bring a person back to life. So that can be done medically with the right equipment and with the right skill sets and all the rest of that. 4 days after the fact, there is nothing that can be done. Consider this. 4 days later, even if nothing's done in the sense of embalming, all of the decay that would have happened makes it where those organs, even if you could restart everything, could never function again. Blood has spoiled by this time. Internal organs have failed. They're done. There's nothing here. There's not even the raw material to try to work with anymore. So what Jesus is about to do is something that only a creator could do. He's going to have to take what isn't even there usable and recreate it from scratch. Now he's going to look just like Lazarus. He's going to restore him to the way he would be if he had not ever died. But Jesus has to overcome the obstacles of a body that absolutely could not function just by shocking a heart. The necrosis of the tissue is way beyond the idea that it could ever be made well again. So it's not just Jesus took the defibrillator to him and shocked him back in some way. It's a total recreation from nothing. He makes something, and it is Lazarus as they know him. The miracle is off the charts here. So this is like creation of the world kind of stuff that he does here. Please make sure that we understand that. So they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was laying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and he said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you have sent me. And when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out bound hand and foot in grave cloths. Now, if people would say, well, he never really died, he was just there waiting for all this. Well, he's still basically mummified at this point. He's able to move around, but he still has the grave cloth. So he didn't just wake up and was just sitting around there, because if he had just sat there and woke up after they had buried him, he'd have taken off all that stuff. He'd have been waiting for them. It's like, I'm glad you guys rolled away the stone. I've been waiting for somebody to get me out of here. Not the case. He couldn't have done anything for himself. He's still wrapped in the stuff that he was wrapped in when he was dead. So his face was still wrapped with the cloth, and Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. Now, I'm going to leave the rest of verse 11 or chapter 11 until next week, because it's kind of the reaction of it. It's best for us to just leave the import of what we see in this kind of all on its own. So we'll pick up at this next week of the fallout from the event and what ends up coming of it. Now, again, it is something that if we just read through the text itself and don't spend a great deal of time looking at the magnitude of what happened, maybe if it's the first time that you've ever really got a chance to study through John to this kind of, this kind of looking at the actual events and kind of thinking your way through it, it is, again, it's thought-provoking, and the importance of resurrection and what all of that implies. By all means, if there's any questions that arise from this, you know how to get in touch with us. At the end of the video, you'll see the website, and you can contact us through the email there. It is oldpaththeology.net, and we love to have any correspondence with you. As I always try to remember to point out, if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and then it gives you the opportunity that when we put out content, we do 2 studies a week, plus topical things that we're doing. And we love to make you aware of them so that you're able to view them and see the things that we do in the ministry here. And so until next week, we'll pick up at the rest of the chapter and go through it. And I pray that what God has done will bless you. And as you study through His Word, that He would continue to reveal Himself to you.